Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my top 50 overall rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, in just the last couple days, I've put out my updated top 45 running backs, wide receivers, top 24 tight ends, and top 32 quarterbacks in order to give you guys as much information as possible as you approach your upcoming drafts. So I thought to myself, I might as well go ahead and talk about my top 50 overall rankings in order to give you guys an understanding as to how I would traverse my upcoming draft, whether I play in a 12-team league the first 4 rounds or in a 10-team league the first 5 rounds. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be revealing each of these tiers and justifying the reasons why I have these players in their certain positions. So let's go ahead and begin with the S tier, the top 4 players going into all of our 2024 fantasy football drafts, regardless of scoring format. Again, if you have a top 4 selection, consider yourself lucky because all these players are studs. If you have an opportunity of selecting Christian McCaffrey within your first overall selection, or if somehow, some way he drops further down the line, go ahead and scoop him up. When we talk about the potential in a half PPR scoring format of a running back repeating as the number 1 overall back, it is far more likely than we have seen in comparison to a full PPR scoring format. Over the course of the last 20 plus years, we have seen 4 different instances in which a running back has finished as the number 1 overall at the position in back-to-back seasons or on multiple occasions. When we travel back to 2002, 2003, Priest Holmes, 2006 and 2007, LaDainian Tomlinson, 2017, 2018, Todd Gurley, and most recently, Christian McCaffrey in 2019 and in 2023. So there is another opportunity for Christian McCaffrey to have another number 1 overall ranking at the running back position. And if he's able to accomplish that in 2024, he would solidify himself as the greatest fantasy running back of all time. Now, if you guys are sitting with the narrative of the full PPR format in the idea that in a full PPR over the course of the last 20 years, there hasn't been a single repeat as the number 1 overall running back, then perhaps Breece Hall as the number 2 option on my list would be your favorite pick going into those top 4 selections. But again, there's no going wrong. Even with guys like Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb, both these guys are averaging 20 fantasy points per game over the course of the 2023 season. And even Tyreek Hill with Tua Tagovailoa back in 2022 was putting up incredible statistics. Now, for those of you who are worried about the potential of CeeDee Lamb missing time due to the fact that, of course, he isn't signed and in training camp currently, I've moved him to the very end of this conversation because if you're drafting this upcoming weekend, you can go ahead and take Tyreek Hill and be just as happy and find just as much success within your first overall selection. Now let's go ahead and let's move on to the next tier. But before we do so, I want to remind you guys again, if you want my thoughts and of course statistics that justify why I have these players ranked as such within their own positions, check out the videos that I posted in the last couple days, or go ahead and get my rankings and all that information in regards to my 2024 fantasy football draft guide via Underdog Fantasy. Again, if you guys want to get your hands on the draft guide and all the associated rankings over the course of this entire season, all you have to do is travel down to the description, click on the link, and of course, use code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10. You're not only going to get the claim of the first-time deposit offer, you get the rankings, you'll get the 2024 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Those rankings will be updated over the course of this entire month, so regardless of when you're drafting, you have an advantage upon your league mates, but the advantage will not stop there. I'll send you Sunday morning rankings every single week throughout the entirety of the season in order to help you capture a 2024 Fantasy Football Championship. So take advantage of the opportunity today. For those of you wondering if you're eligible, again, it's got to be a first-time deposit using code Andrew, and you've got to be eligible based on the map to the right side of the screen. If you are, fantastic. If you are not, or you've used the code in the past, you can also check out Patreon, all that content and much more in regards to the 2024 Fantasy Football Champion tier on Patreon. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's talk about the A tier with guys like Bijan Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. Many of you guys over the course of the last 20 plus days, whether it's been live streams or in the comment sections, you've asked me, Andrew, where is your favorite spot to select from in 2024 draft? And I've consistently said 1.03 to 1.08 because as it currently stands, there's a quote-unquote top 8 in fantasy football. And if you're able to get any of these 8 players, you should be extremely ecstatic going into the 2024 season, considering the level of production that they're going to provide to your team on a weekly basis. We have seen consistency from a lot of these players. And even though Bijan Robinson is a second-year guy, the rest of the field has been incredible and at the top of their position when healthy over the course of the last couple seasons. So going forward, the expectation is that if you're able to get one of these 4 options this upcoming season, you should execute that. Now, if in fact you are worried about Jamar Chase, his contract negotiation slash, the fact that he's holding in and not practicing still yet, if you're worried about that, just go for the alternatives. Guys like Bijan Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson are fantastic selections. And I know some of you are worried about the potential of a Tyler Algier with Bijan or Sam Darnold with Justin Jefferson. But if you listen to the videos that I've produced over the course of the last couple of days, those things should not concern you in comparison to the rest of the field that has far more concerns in regards to their overall upside going into 2024. So let's go ahead and move on to the B tier, where we find a lot of running backs that are incredibly valued going into this upcoming season. Again, the end of the first round, beginning of the second round running backs, you can't really go wrong with any of them. And that's why I've ranked them so highly, because I really do believe that any of these running backs on my roster are going to deliver. All of them truly do have top 3 upside going into this upcoming season. So what I often do within my drafts, if I'm sitting at 10, 11, or 12, and there's a potential of selecting A.J. Brown and or Garrett Wilson, and I don't want to approach with a double RB strategy, what I often find myself doing is selecting A.J. Brown or Garrett Wilson, because I know that I'm going to get one of these 4 running backs in return in the second round, and I'm comfortable having any of these guys. Guys like Jonathan Taylor, a former number 1 overall running back in 2021, and even last season when healthy was a dominant force and is only going to get better with, of course, a healthy offensive line, and now Anthony Richardson within the lineup. We have Saquon Barkley, who has finished as a top fantasy option on multiple occasions within a lackluster offense that over the course of the last couple seasons has truly held him back from his overall potential. Now that you add him into an elite offense, my goodness, the sky's the limit. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who should be able to experience an Alvin Kamara year 2 bump in order to get himself into the top tier conversation. Now, if in fact that hamstring injury is going to slow him down at the beginning of the year, that could end up being a factor, but ultimately we're expecting him to be fully healthy and ready to go. Kyron Williams, again, many people, worry about Blake Corum far too much. Amongst all running backs last season, he was number 2 in terms of fantasy points per game on average. He was averaging about a touchdown and over 100 yards from scrimmage per game. He's an incredible talent. And of course, you guys know how much I like guys like A.J. Brown and Garrett Wilson. So I often take one of those and I pair them up with one of these running backs in the second round and find myself a lot of success. And honestly, if you find yourself at the back end of the first round and you're able to pair that, you find yourself a lot of upside considering all these players are studs at their positions. Now, if we move on to the C tier, we have more of these running backs who are quite frankly just elite at the position. I understand that we haven't seen enough of Devon Achane to be able to claim that, but understand that when we talk about guys like Derrick Henry, he's been a top 8 quarterback in each of the last 5 seasons. The one season in which he got injured and broke his foot, he was number 1 amongst all running backs and had like a 100-point lead prior to the injury. I mean, he is a special talent. I mean, guys like Travis Etienne was a top 3 back last year. Devon Achane, if in fact just gets more touches and more involvement within this offense, I mean, we just saw Raheem Mostert finish as number 2. Why not someone like Devon Achane? Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we go ahead and we drift to the younger wide receivers. Yes, Puka Nacua has 1 year of top-tier experience, but then we haven't seen top-tier experience in fantasy football from guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Drake London. But understand that over the course of the last 5 seasons, on average, 2019 to 2023, we have seen 5 different wide receiver ones every single season on average. So this year, in terms of my top 12 rankings, the 5 different wide receivers that were not in the top 12 last year that will go ahead and put their name in the overall hat this season is Jefferson, Chase, Wilson, Harrison, and London. And that's how I've established it. Now, at the running back position, again, it's on an average of 4.6 over the course of the last 5 seasons, 2019 to 2023. And the 4 running backs that I have, of course, making the top 12 rankings that weren't there last year, Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, Isaiah Pacheco, and Josh Jacobs. Now, speaking of Isaiah Pacheco and Josh Jacobs, let's move on to the D tier. Guys that close out the top 24 in the first 2 rounds of a given draft in a half PPR scoring format, at least in my mind. Isaiah Pacheco and, of course, a guy like Josh Jacobs are being highly undervalued. Both of them are going to get themselves upwards of potentially 50 to 60 receptions this season. Of course, they're going to handle 80+% of the rushing attempts within their offenses. And quite frankly, both of them are associated with great teams and offenses that are going to continue to score at a high level. Then we have elite wide receivers that are veterans in their own right. Guys like Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, future Hall of Famers that are continuing to produce even at their high age of 30 plus years of age. Many of you may consider, hey, after a wide receiver gets to the age of 30, there's a significant drop off. Are we going to worry about guys like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and Mike Evans? But we have seen guys like Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Adam Thielen last season produced ridiculous numbers. And even, of course, Evans and Adams produce at incredible rates despite their age because they are elite at the position and aren't slowing down. So, of course, within the top 24, we have a pretty equal distribution. 12 running backs, 12 wide receivers. And, of course, we continue on towards the E tier to talk about comparative values because when we go ahead and get into the 26 to 30 range, we really can draft Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta anywhere here. I would have no issue at all taking Sam Laporta or Travis Kelce even at 26 or potentially even 25 ahead of Deebo Samuel, depending on how your first 2 rounds of your draft have gone ahead and established themselves. Depending on whether you've gone wide receiver, running back, and you have balance there, it may give you more confidence in order to select one of these two. And the reason why I feel so comfortable drafting one of these two options within this range primarily has to do with my projections as to how I see them playing in 2024. Under the assumption that they play full healthy seasons, I've projected them out to 205 to 210 fantasy points. Now, in a full PPR, it's a different overall structure, but when we talk about the fantasy equivalents of what 205 to 210 fantasy points produces, based on averages over the course of the last 3 seasons, 2021 to 2023, that is typically RB12 and wide receiver 12. So when we take into account that we're sitting at 29 and 30, those are safe overall selections. If anything, I've made a discount on the potential of maybe them missing 1 or 2 games in this overall circumstance. So when we approach this upcoming season and both of them stay healthy for the full year, and we take into account the drop-off in production being so drastic at the tight end position, the comparative values from tight end to running back to wide receiver, we can line them up. But understand that as soon as you go from RB12 to RB13, the drop-off sure could be maybe 5 to 8 points, but the drop-off from tight end 1 and 2 to guys like 4 and 5 end up being 30 to 40 plus points. So in this overall circumstance, when you get a guy like Kelce or Laporta, you're not only giving yourself a positional advantage, but a massive fantasy point advantage, considering they're putting up just as many points, if not more, as guys that are low-end wide receiver 1s, high-end wide receiver 2s, and same thing at the running back position. Now, if in fact you do feel comfortable with the idea that Travis Kelce and or Sam Laporta are going to be capable of putting up 225 plus points this season, where I would suggest you end up drafting them is probably ahead of Pacheco. If you feel that confident that they're capable of putting up 225 plus fantasy points, the fantasy, comparative values, and of course the drop-off in production would suggest that you have to draft them within the first 2 rounds of this upcoming season. And I've seen that happen at the back end of the second round. People are able to grab an early Tyreek Hill, pair it up with a Sam Laporta in the second, and then grab a running back in the third, because somehow, some way, running backs continue to fall despite their incredible value. And of course, majority of these guys being 3 down backs and getting all of the receiving utilization within their offenses. Now, of course, guys like Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Rachaad White, younger players, and have only just recently found immediate success, but they're only going to continue to build upon it, and that's why I feel so confident with them within the E tier. Now, moving on to the F tier. Then we want to talk about comparative values at quarterback, because now we're initially inviting quarterback to the conversation of when you should be drafting guys like Jalen Hurts and or Josh Allen. Now, I've justified selecting these quarterbacks at the end of the 3rd round. If you feel as comfortable as you possibly can within your first 2 selections, you can draft them anywhere within the 3rd round. Honestly, I feel comfortable considering they're in the same tier as DJ Moore, Cooper Kupp, Alvin Kamara, James Cook. I would be very much so comfortable taking them ahead of all of these alternative players within the F tier, primarily because if in fact you have an opportunity of getting the #1 overall quarterback in fantasy football, regardless of scoring format, when you have an opportunity of getting a quarterback that is going to score a volume of 380 or more fantasy points, like we have seen guys like Josh Allen and of course Patrick Mahomes establish over the course of the last 4 seasons. Again, when we talk about the value of quarterback, from 2019 to 2023, we have seen 16 quarterbacks put up 350 or more fantasy points. If you go back to 2004 to 2018, there were 16 quarterbacks. The quarterback position in fantasy football over the course of the last 5 seasons, there is significantly more upside within the position, especially at the top tier in regards to guys like Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, who don't miss time due to injuries and have incredible rushing upside. Again, anywhere within the 3rd round, I'd feel comfortable doing so. But worst case scenario, you shouldn't be letting one of these 2 guys get out of the 3rd round if you're at the back end of that 3rd round conversation and are about to dip into the 4th round, where we go ahead and begin by talking about the G tier. Guys like Brandon Ayuk, Kenneth Walker, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. Based on these wide receivers, just looking at them first and foremost, they're technically all wide receiver 2s going into this year, that if in fact they were given more opportunity, they'd be, significantly higher options than, top 20 ranked wide receivers. Rather, they would be potentially top 12 ranked wide receivers going into this given season. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, Brandon Ayuk isn't the number 2, but based on the fact that he hasn't been in training camp, but I believe going into the season, considering he hasn't been present, Deebo Samuel may get a lot more utilization early on within the year, which over the course of the entire season, if Deebo Samuel maintains his health, will certainly be able to establish himself as the clear number 1 in terms of total targets, opportunities, etc. Of course, considering he gets himself a lot of rushing upside. But Guys like Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, still going to be highly valuable and have already proven that they can be top 12 players. They just need to be given the upside of opportunity within those overall conversations. And then we have Kenneth Walker, a top 15 running back, somebody that I'm very comfortable drafting in any position going into this upcoming year, especially if I'm waiting on my second RB. This is a perfect option as a 3-down back that could very easily finish as a workhorse this season. Moving on to the H tier, we have guys like Patrick Mahomes and Mark Andrews. When we talk about comparative values, Patrick Mahomes has an opportunity of being the number 1 overall quarterback in fantasy football this year. Again, when you add more weapons to this offense, and he has the ability to be drafted this late, especially when we have 20 wide receivers off the board and 15 running backs already taken, it does give us an opportunity within this overall 4th round to establish the number 1 overall quarterback that, like I mentioned, could put up somewhere close to 380 to 400 fantasy points. And the drop-off of production at the quarterback position, when we talk about the top 3, compared to guys that are, potentially the number 9 through 12 ranked quarterbacks, there's nearly 100-point difference of total fantasy points scored that you're getting an advantage on just within that overall position in comparison to taking, wide receiver 21 or wide receiver 25, which again, the drop off there at very best, maybe 15 to 20 points. And that is a pessimistic representation because honestly, it may even be closer in terms of drop off. Then we have other options here. We have guys like Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, established running backs that have found themselves a lot of success. But the reason why I value Mark Andrews within this range is because I anticipate to see Mark Andrews put up very similar numbers to what he did last year. Now, he may take a little bit of a downtick based on the fact that we're getting more representation out of Isaiah Likely, the expansion of, opportunity to guys like Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. We'll have to see, of course, a lot of touchdowns going in the direction of Derrick Henry. But Mark Andrews last season, when healthy, 12.18 fantasy points per game. Someone like David Montgomery last season, 12.91 fantasy points per game. When I went ahead and I've projected out their potential going into this given season, they're both 12-point players in a half PPR scoring format. So of course they'll go back to back, but it's just a matter of what position do you want to specifically address within the given round going forward. And oftentimes I find myself very comfortable with either other two, getting David Montgomery as an RB2, the most valuable handcuff of fantasy football, or getting Mark Andrews as my established tight end 1 and someone who could very easily be a dark horse and jump into the tight end 1 conversation within the end of the season. Now, yes, I do anticipate less potential production from him this year, very reliant on touchdowns, but even in that circumstance could very easily surprise us. Moving on to the final group of players, talking about DK Metcalf, Lamar Jackson, Trey McBride, Michael Pittman Jr., Dalton Kincaid, and Stephon Diggs. Again, at the wide receiver position here, we have honestly consistent play. We have guys like DK Metcalf, who's finished as the number 12, 16, and 18 overall wide receiver in the last 3 seasons. We have Michael Pittman Jr., he has finished as the number 15, 23, and 15 overall wide receiver in fantasy football. Then we have Stephon Diggs, who has been a top 10 wide receiver in each of the last 4 seasons. So we have consistency here at wide receiver. And in comparison, we also have tight ends and quarterbacks because of the comparative values. We have a guy like Lamar Jackson, who has been very consistent throughout his entire career. When we talk about the drop-off in production at quarterback, like I mentioned, the top 3 are the top 3. Lamar Jackson has proven in his career he could be the number 1. But even if we don't anticipate him to reach that overall potential, there's still a 20 to 30 point drop off from the number 4 overall quarterback based on averages over the course of the last 3 seasons in comparison to quarterback 5 and 6. So if in fact you do not take Lamar Jackson at this position, you have to 100% accurately predict and select the right player around him. And that's why I've put guys like DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman Jr., and Stephon Diggs around Lamar Jackson, right? Primarily because, again, when we are drafting, if you take Lamar Jackson, you're going to get a top 5 quarterback automatically. Now, around him, we're not taking any risks. We need to establish that we are getting top 20 wide receivers with upside. And that's why we have to have DK Metcalf's, Michael Pittman Jr.'s, and Stephon Diggs around him. Because if we make a mistake and we select the wrong wide receiver and they don't finish within that top 20 to 23 overall conversation, my goodness, we're going to be in trouble based on the overall selection that we made. Now, when we bring in the conversation of guys like Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, let me give you an example. I anticipate both these guys to put up 180 plus fantasy points this year. I think the tight end position, especially within the top 5, has never been as great as it is going to be in this upcoming year. And sure, we're not going to find as much upside. Travis Kelce back in 2022 put up 260 fantasy points in a half PPR. I don't think we're going to reach those upside of potentials, but we're going to find far more depth in terms of top tier talent in the top 5 than we have in seasons past. Again, we haven't really seen a lot of depth at the position. Like I've mentioned in the past, we often find more team defenses and more kickers putting up over 150 fantasy points in comparison to tight ends within given seasons. But when we talk about someone like Dalton Kincaid, my current projection for him this season, and it's a safe projection, 90 receptions, 950 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, somewhere in that 180 plus fantasy point range, which again, those numbers as the number one receiving option of the Buffalo Bills, honestly, are just automatic in my mind. I feel like those are just going to be implicated within his overall upside based on my projection scale. Now, this pretty much covers my top 50 overall ranked players. Again, the way you want to approach your draft and the strategy in which you go ahead and manipulate the draft is up to you. We've gone ahead and talked about multiple draft strategy videos at the running back, quarterback, tight end positions over the course of this entire season. We've done multiple drafts in which we can go ahead and double up on wide receivers or double up on running backs, take a hero running back approach, a double RB, strat, double hero, quote unquote. There's a bunch of ways that you can go ahead and navigate your draft. But these are the top 50 players going into my 2024 fantasy football season in a half PPR scoring format, 4 point per passing touchdown. And that's going to cover it. Now, for those of you who are looking for my all-encompassing rankings, positional by tier rankings at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, my top 200 flex rankings, whether it is half PPR, full PPR, my super flex rankings, all of that can be found. Of course, all you got to do is sign up via Underdog Fantasy using code Andrew, making that first time deposit minimum of $10. You can get my rankings, the draft guide, and of course, subsequent rankings for the remainder of the season. Or you can go ahead and check out Patreon. All of that is included and much more. Via Patreon, the most valuable thing is just my ear. You can ask me unlimited questions. You don't have to wait for me to live stream in order to ask me questions, and I'll answer you as quickly as I can in order to help you guys capture a 2024 Fantasy Football Championship. All of that information down in the description. I want to thank you all for watching. Click the like button, subscribe if you haven't yet already. We'll be back tomorrow talking about some potential league-winning upside players for 2024. And until next time, guys, I'll see you. Peace.